Very important new program that the city is very interested to make sure that the city of San Francisco puts on its best face. Vacant and abandoned storefronts. And we'll have two important stakeholders who understand this program very well. Mauricio Hernandez from DBI, Chief Building Inspector for Code Enforcement, and Ian Ferrosi, who's the legislative aide for Sandra Fuhrer. And Ian basically wrote the legislation for this, so he knows it very well. Gentlemen.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and kick it off. So again, my name is Ian Fergosi. I'm the legislative aide for Supervisor Sandra Fuhrer, the supervisor of District 1, mostly the Richmond district. So Supervisor Fuhrer's interest in vacant storefronts really started and around this legislation really started when she was running for supervisor back in 2016. She had heard from a lot of community members in the Richmond, a lot of small businesses that were very concerned about the proliferation of vacant storefronts along the three major corridors in the Richmond, the Clement Street corridor, the Geary corridor, and the Balboa corridor. She had heard when she was campaigning from folks about buildings that had been vacant, some that she had seen herself, others that she wasn't aware of, buildings that had been vacant for decades. Heard stories from small business owners who had been in the Richmond for many years, but then had been forced out because of their rents tripling or quadrupling, and then the storefronts sitting vacant for years after they had been kicked out due to those rent increases. So this was clearly a big problem for her. So she held a hearing in February of 2018 with had the Department of Building Inspection there to report on the status of vacant storefronts in San Francisco, and we learned in that hearing that there was 0 storefronts registered as vacant in District 1. So according to our city database, we had 0 vacancies, and so we knew there had to be a major problem, because you just need to walk down any of those corridors for less than 5 minutes and you'll see half a dozen vacant storefronts at least. So we knew there must have been a problem. We started working with DBI, Mauricio and some other folks at DBI to look at, well, what's the problem? Why is it that we have a vacant storefront registry, we have an ordinance, why is it that we're missing all of these vacancies? And we actually did a crowdsourcing campaign with the help of the Richmond District blog in our neighborhood, and we found there was 156 vacancies just in the Richmond District alone, reported by neighbors and small business owners all throughout the district. So we knew when we sat down with DBI, we know that there's a big problem. We have 156 actual vacancies, and according to our vacancy registry, we have 0. So what's the problem? We were able to take a look at the code and determine that the biggest issue was that according to our Vacant Storefront Ordinance, a building or a storefront is not technically considered vacant if it's being actively offered for lease. So that just means that there could be a sign in the window saying for lease, and we noticed that a lot of these buildings did have these signs, for lease signs, up for years, sometimes even decades. But we had heard, there was from other businesses that had approached them and tried to fill those spaces, there didn't seem to be any interest in actually filling those spaces. So we knew that in order to have an accurate count of the vacant storefronts in the city, we had to change that part of the code, and that we can't really assess the magnitude of this problem of vacancies and the vacant storefronts across the city if we don't even have an accurate count of the vacancies. So our goal was to fix the code, to update the program so that we actually could get an accurate count of the vacancies and make it a more effective registry. And we would also, at the same time, by doing that, be able to better connect owners of buildings with potential tenants, small businesses looking for space. And by having this accurate vacancy registry and connecting the Office of Economic and Workforce Development to that registry, we would have an easier time making that happen. So this is all part of a broader citywide effort to reduce the number of vacant storefronts throughout the city, and we knew that in order to do that, we have to first have an accurate count of those vacant storefronts. So that's really what the motivation behind this legislation is. I'll go ahead and kick it over to Mauricio for some of the nitty gritty, but basically what this does, in a nutshell, is that this ensures that all the vacant storefronts are identified and registered, regardless of whether the property is being offered for rent, regardless of whether it has a sign in the window. Also increasing the resources to DBI to monitor and enforce these registration requirements, because without this accurate registry, without actually considering these storefronts vacant, DBI is unable to collect the vacant storefront registration, which means that they don't have the resources to actually enforce the law. And then also clarifying the enforcement process, certain penalties for failing to register, and requiring annual inspections of vacant storefronts to ensure that they're not causing a hazard or a nuisance. So that's really the legislation in a nutshell, and I'll go ahead and kick it over to Mauricio for the rest.
Yeah, good afternoon. Mauricio Hernandez, Chief Building Inspector. Yeah, so there's some changes, definition of the definition was actually changed and revised to show what is defined as a vacant building. It's unoccupied and unsecured, or it has been unoccupied for over 30 days, or it actually has unoccupied and has multiple code violations. Like Ian said, we had some properties or some cases that we had multiple complaints in regards to vacant building, but yet we couldn't do anything because there was exempt from the building code as they had a sign. Now with this new changes to the definition, even if it has a sign and it actually has violations previously, we can actually write the notice or request the owner to register the building. A couple major changes was that before the registration, before March, you were allowed to register the building but not pay the registration fee for more than 270 days. So you had that span of time that you were not allowed, you were not required to pay. Now you're required to pay within, as soon as you come in and register, you have to pay the registration fee. Yes. There's also a change whenever you go into the system. The next year you will be required to get a report from a licensed contractor saying that the building has been inspected by him and that electrical, plumbing, and all the maintenance of the property has been, it's up to code. And then you're gonna be allowed to renew that registration. The other major item is actually a penalty of 4 times the registration fee for a total of $2,844. Let's say that somebody decides not to comply with the ordinance. As soon as we issue the notice of violation, we send it to a director's hearing, then there's gonna be a penalty fee assessed for that owner to fail to comply with the requirements. So here's a summary of changes from 2014 to 2019 and what was changed. One of the key issues that we're having, like I said, it was those exemptions of, putting a lease sign and having the property not being maintained. And that was one of the major issues that we were having, and not being able to register the property as a vacant storefront. Also, code enforcement has changed their DBI process and how to handle the complaints, so it is more self-explanatory to the customers and also to the complainant that actually files the complaint. So we receive public complaints from anonymous complainant. We'll get the complaint, we'll review it, we'll send a letter, we'll put it on the database, we'll send a letter to the owner saying that we just got a complaint and that your building needs to be registered. After that, if the owner does not comply with our letter, then we'll issue the notice of violation, and then he'll be subject to penalty fees. The owners will still have a chance to, say that they're exempt, because there's still some exemptions on the ordinance, For example, if you have a valid building permit, I know there's a lot of storefronts that are going through the soft story program. So therefore, those are exempt as long as you have an active permit and there's a history of permit inspections on the case. The other option would be if you are actually working, let's say that somebody's doing a change of use in a storefront, going from another use, and you're working with planning to get that permit. If you provide that information, you're gonna be subject to the exemptions. Another one that we're actually also reviewing is if you have a rental lease agreement, then DBI will do an inspection out there to make sure that the place is actually rented and it has that lease agreement in place. On our website, we also changed our information so that there's more information provided to the customers, so that if there's a complaint or there's a concern, they can send an email, call us, and right away we'll be able to guide you on the requirements. Any questions?
If you have a loud voice, you can do it from your seat. If not, you can use the microphone.
Yeah, so I think
Ian, could you? No one can hear a question, so give us a synopsis of
Sure.
what her problem is.
yeah. So right. So the question is about feeling like because it is difficult to fill a space within 30 days that you're being punished by not doing so in that 30-day period. Yeah, so I totally understand that. We had because of this, we did include a provision in here so that if a building is, or if a storefront is leased out within a year of it becoming vacant, that there is a refund of half of the registration fee. So half of it is registered. The thing is, because DBI is having to do the work of going out and inspecting and verifying safety, they have to be compensated for that. So we did want to be mindful of that and wanted to make sure we're not punishing people. This isn't about punishing property owners for not being able to rent it out within 30 days. But and that's why we have that exemption there. But there has to be some cost recovery. So having that half refund is there. I can't speak to the specific piece that you mentioned about having the permit withdrawn. Maybe Mauricio can answer that, but I'm not.
Repeat the question for us, please. No, let him repeat it so people can hear.
She's asking if the law has changed, if I answer correctly. If you have the lease and you show us the lease, we can exempt it. But there's also that issue where you know, in the past we were having owners provide the lease, but yet 3 months later we were going out again, and even though they had a lease, nobody was actually occupying the space. The definition shows that you actually have to occupy the space, even though you have a lease. You can't say, look, I'm gonna occupy the space in a year, but I have a lease. It's still considered, and I understand that, but it's defined as an occupied. You have to have a lease. If you have a lease agreement, you know, it has to be occupied. The space has to be occupied, unless, you know, they can show proof to the building inspector they're actually trying to pull a permit for a change of use, and it's got to be a variance required. If there's a variance required, then yes, by all means, we'll review the case again, and there's not going to be any penalty fees, but you're still going to have that active complaint. Because like I said, in the past we were having that issue where we can say, sure, we're going to work with the owners, we're going to work with the tenants, but 3 months down the line, there was no action, no other information provided to DBI. So therefore, you got to remember, we don't work with planning, so we have to keep digging and sending emails and saying, hey, what's the update on this one? I still get, you know, a complaint from 311 every other month about the property being empty and not secured. And that's the issue that we're having, because, you know, I can't really say to 311, hey, I already have it in the register. You know, don't send me any more complaints. That's the problem. But if you have any issues, I mean, let me know. Send us the information, or work with our inspectors, and then we can review the ordinance. Yeah.
Thank you. We have plenty of time for questions, so I encourage you to queue so everyone can hear your wonderful question, because your question was a very good question. We don't want our customers to be in catch-22s. Please.
Hi. You have a statement here. Provide an annual report from a licensed professional confirming the storefront has been maintained. What kind of licensed professionals do you want?
That could be a general contractor. You know, it's got to be an affidavit saying that they did a walkthrough, make sure that electrical and plumbing, all utilities are up to code, and the maintenance of the property, make sure that there's no broken windows. There's nothing that requires a building permit, or there's nothing that requires a repair at that time.
Can architects and engineers do it?
They can do it as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any posting requirements for buildings that are registered? At that storefront, so that it says, you know, registered?
No, at this time, no. There's no requirement. Once you register, we'll put you on the list, and your case is gonna be closed, but we'll have you on the registration list that you register for that year as a vacant storefront.
Hi. I want to say I support this for the scofflaws, the people who are, you know, blatantly leaving things empty forever. I would think that the majority of small business owners like myself, we want to have renters in there. We want it leased out because we need the money to cover the mortgage, or to live off of whatever it is. So, as a small business owner, I'm feeling really frustrated that, because I know it's really difficult to fill a space in 30 days. You want to get the right tenant in there. That takes time to like figure that out. You don't want like nothing but, no offense to nail salons, but you don't want like another nail salon, you know, if you want to wait for somebody that would benefit the community in that space without being a scofflaw. You're really trying to do good. So I guess my point is I'm feeling really frustrated and helpless to be able to have my voice heard. And I'm wondering, is there some kind of coalition or organization of small business owners so that we can have a voice, a collective voice? Because I can't imagine, I think there's got to be a whole lot of other small business owners who are feeling the same way as me. I'm like, what do I do? I'm at your mercy.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we did meet with like the Council of Merchants Association and a lot of the merchant associations in our district, and yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. Again, what we addressed before about the 30-day issue, and that's why we did purposely include that provision of allowing that refund if it is rented out within a year. But you know, just from our experience in talking to a lot of different stakeholders and small businesses, the vast majority of folks we talked to were very supportive because they saw this as, you know, the holding of vacant properties. I guess the cons of that massively outweighing, you know, the having to for those that are trying to actively rent out their space, having to pay that fee, again, reduced fee, because there is that refund. That as a policy decision was very advantageous for most of the small businesses, and that's why we ultimately thought this was the right thing to do. So yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I think that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, though, we really felt like this is a problem that needed bold action, and we really needed to have that exemption in there for those who do have the will to rent it out quickly. But we still have to have some compensation for the Department of Building Inspection that has to go out there and do the work. There's just no way around that, unfortunately.
No, I get that, but 30 days, that's crazy. Anyway, if there are other business owners out there who feel frustrated like me, you can talk to me afterwards. Maybe we can build something, a coalition.
Hi, thank you for your time. I have a question for Mauricio. You were talking about how a lease is not enough to show that the property is actually being rented out. My question is, what about with build-outs? Because, you know, like a restaurant tenant or some other tenants have to have very specialized spaces. Some of those take a little bit longer to build. So how does that factor in with the 30 days?
Well, like I said before, there is that exception that if you actually have a permit in the progress,
Okay.
we can actually work with you. You know, it is, like I said, it was kind of difficult before because, like yes, and there's a few spaces that we're using that to take advantage. Like we had, you know, I can give an example of time I had. Somebody got a lease for using it as a storage space for their other side. They were actually renting out the two spaces, but they were using one side for storage. And we kept getting complaints every 2 other weeks. We got one from 311 saying, hey, they're considered, you know, empty. They're considered, you know, and they're not following the requirements of a store. They're not using it as they intended using it. But yeah, if you are actually working with planning and saying, hey, I'm gonna do a build out, then if we can have that information, then you're not gonna be considered a vacant building.
I see. So in that case, would you pay the registration fee first and then be refunded, or just?
You won't have to pay registration fee. What we do is we usually keep the complaint open,
I see.
and we put a note saying that you are actually working on trying to get a permit, which is actually under the exemptions.
Okay. And then my second question is in regards to what about for spaces that use their space more like for like pop-up shops? So they might have somebody in there for, you know, 3 months, 6 months, and so they're vacant. Let's say in January they're vacant, and then February through June they're full, and then they're vacant again. Would they pay the registration fee twice? How does that really work?
To be honest, I wasn't prepared for that question because we haven't had that yet. I mean, you know, it might be treated as a case-by-case item when we get to it, and then we write one notice. Because remember, we can only require the owner to register once, and that's what the cost is. It's an annual request.
Okay.
So it might be something that I have to work on and review the language of the ordinance.
Okay, I see. Yeah, just because I know that in the city a lot more people are going to pop-up shop tenants. So if I have a storefront, I don't want to fill it and then have to repay that registration fee or something like that. Okay. Thank you so much.
I have an apartment building that I need to do seismic retrofit on it, and in the building I have a nail salon downstairs, and I'm supposed to upgrade the bathroom to be compliant with ADA. So the nail salon has to vacate and do the work. It's going to be about 3 months to do the work, and I have the permit already. After I finish the work on the nail salon, can I use the space to store items while I'm doing the seismic retrofit on the rest of the building? And even though I have the storefront beautifully looking, and you cannot tell if it's vacant or not. Just for storage for the time being until I finish the seismic retrofit, and then I'll rent it again.
Under your requirement for soft storage, they require you to pull 2 permits, one for the commercial side and one for the build.
Yes.
Okay. So as long as you have active permits and you have the one for the commercial side, you're actually exempt.
But even after I finish the retrofit
Well-
of the nail salon, there's still gonna be.
Once you finish, no, you're not exempt anymore. As long as you have an active permit, and both of them are active, one for the commercial side and one for the residential, then you're exempt. But once you final everything and you get your certificate of final completion, somebody files a complaint or an inspector, because we're required to notify, or the inspection services is required to notify my department of at least 2 storefronts they can see in their area every week, I believe. If you're one of those properties, then yeah, we'll send you a letter saying that you're required to register the building or the storefront.
I have a question, Mauricio. No one asked it, so I will. If I have multiple storefronts in the same building, do I have to register all storefronts as separate storefronts?
Yes, you have to. Per the ordinance, you're required to register each separate storefront.
Ian, you're kind of the originator of this. Could you tell us if there's more legislation coming down the line? How can our commercial property owners anticipate future requirements?
Yeah, I would say I'd push back on the fact that I'm the originator of this. I wouldn't take credit for that, but yes. So I know that, again, we are working, this has been sort of a part of a broader strategy. I know Supervisor Brown, another piece of legislation that Supervisor Fewer supported was Supervisor Brown's, which was to help streamline small business permits. So there are other things happening as far as I know there are other efforts around trying to find ways to better streamline permits. I don't know of anything in the pipeline in terms of enforcement measures. I think this legislation was unanimously co-sponsored by the whole Board of Supervisors. I think the supervisors were very satisfied with the regulation mechanisms that we were using here. Tying that to increased efforts by the Office of Economic and Workforce Development to pair business owners with property owners, and then partnering that with Supervisor Brown's legislation and other streamlining efforts. I think that's what we're looking at now. I don't know of any others. There could be, but I'm not aware of any others.
I appreciate it. Let's give them a round of applause. We have one question.
Yeah, we got one.
Okay.
Final question.
Repeat the question too.
So she's asking if at the time of, if I understand correctly, if at the time you renew, if it's a penalty if you don't have the registration with the report for the contract. Well, yeah, there's gonna be a notice of violation issue because you're not gonna be allowed to register the building, so you're gonna be under violation. You'll require at the renewal time, you'll require that letter, that affidavit from the contractor. Yes, at the moment we're drafting a letter, basically a sample letter of what we have. Usually we have that for special inspection projects. We have a letter like that, so we're drafting a letter similar to it, which require you to provide details of the maintenance of the property and the utilities, and how is the property being secured or how the storefront is being secured. Once that contractor provides the brief explanation, then he'll make sure that he'll follow our language that we gotta use on the letter that we're drafting. It's we're drafting it. It's pretty soon. We'll send that out the email. I just gotta get the final approvals. The goal is to put it on the package for the application. You know how a lot of people that are actually on the register will get the package of the application online, and will have all the notes. You have the frequent questions. So the goal moving forward is to add that section to that sample letter for the contract. Okay.
I have another question about the accessible business entrance program. I'm going to have a presentation on that in a few minutes, but I met with merchants in our neighborhood about the accessible business entrance program, and their reaction was, some of them said, well, I'm just going to retire. Some of them said, well, I'm going to put my office in there. It seems to me like these two requirements by the city are really in conflict, because very, very laudably, I think, business owners are being required to make their business entrances accessible, and a lot of businesses have one step up. And the requirements are extensive, and get into the slope of the sidewalks and an accessible sidewalk pathway to the nearest bus stop and those sorts of things. It may have changed since then, so I'll be here for the next one. But at any rate, is there any kind of, what is the city's reaction to this, what appears to me to be a real bind?
To be honest, I'm not involved a lot in the accessible entrance program, but this ordinance actually has been in place even before 2014. So this is actually an old ordinance that was just amended. It wasn't like something that just was drafted in March. It has been here for a couple of years. The problem that we're having is that, when it was drafted before in 2014, there was a lot of exemptions that either owners or whoever owned a storefront was using to get away with keeping the building. See, that's an issue that we were having as complaints. We're tracking at least 50 complaints a week just for this specific area of San Francisco, and yet we couldn't write a notice because, if somebody went in and used the exemption saying, hey, I'm exempt, I don't need to register, I don't need to do it. So I'm not really sure if that answers your question, because I'm not involved in the accessible entrance program, so I really don't know how that's gonna affect it. Well, it's not enough. That's a change of use. You will have to work with planning to see whether that use is actually applicable, and if it's not, then you still have to go through a change of use process.
Is commercial condo included in this program? Commercial condo.
No,
Commercial condo.
no, just storefronts,
Non-residential.
non-residential.
The condo actually.
Well, if you have commercial spaces on the ground floor, then yeah, you're subject to the ordinance. If you, yeah, yes. So anything that has commercial storefronts, it's required to either be registered or show proof that it's not required to be on the vacant registration. Yes.
So how about the commercial with the messaging floor, the message floor is included? Commercial, right? So the message.
Anything that has commercial is a storefront is required to be
Yeah,
registered.
they have a messaging floor up there, so it should be included.
Yes, anything that is commercial storefront, yes.
By the way, thank you for talking about the ABE. You will get the first question. Any other questions we have? One last question.
Before I had the nail salon in that space, it used to be an office for insurance company. So the nail salon is vacated. Can I use it as an office for me to manage the apartment building and put the desk and so there's no change of use from the beginning?
Again, we go back to the use of the space. I mean, if you can have documents showing that the actual use for the space was an office, then yeah, sure. But you gotta have to do, all the legwork. You gotta have to find all the verification, because if you get a complaint that, you did an illegal change of use from a nail salon to an office, then, that's a possibility that can happen.
So that space was available for any use, doesn't have to be nail salon or
Like-
office or anything.
Like I said, as long as you can provide the documents, you'll be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Mauricio has a booth over here. If you have some other follow-up questions or questions that are very specific to your commercial space, he's more than happy to answer them. And also, his email address is at the back of the presentation. So gentlemen, job well done. Thank you. Folks, we have a raffle. Don't go, don't go. DBI is actually giving something away.
So we're doing 5 additional bags for this workshop. First number, 426-426. We'll meet you at the redemption table. Next number, 471-471. Next number, 448-448.